Hey there. Buckle up everyone, because we're going over the Halo timeline from the Forerunners to the Human Covenant War.
We're dropping in hot with this lore like a bunch of ODSTs in the combat zone. 106,445 BCE, the Human Forerunner Wars.
Now I know what you're thinking, it's 106,445 BC. How could Forerunners and humans be fighting each other?
Well, in fact, humans were once the proud owners of a prosperous galactic civilization, one that had a fighting chance against the futuristic, fantastical Forerunners even. But before I get ahead of myself, the Forerunners, if you don't know who they are a technologically advanced humanoid race of aliens who created the Halo rings. Forerunner society has a system of caste called rates. Depending on their rate, their appearance would be a little bit different. Genetic mutation and cybernetic augmentation would be used to alter one's physical traits as they advance within society. Some, like the Didact, the villain of Halo 4, were larger and stronger than others. But why are the humans and Forerunners fighting anyways? Well, at the time, humans had spaceships and guns so high-tech they would make the UNSC look primitive. Using their fancy tech, the humans rapidly expand their territory throughout the galaxy. The Forerunners already held a great amount of territory themselves, so conflict with these ancient humans was inevitable. What had the humans spreading so quickly? Years before the end of the Forerunner-Human Wars, humans came in contact with the Flood. The Flood is a parasitic alien organism that takes control of any species it comes in contact with. Now, the Flood inhabit bodies of host species and then reprogram to kill and destroy. This parasitic conquest is how the Flood survives, by spreading and taking more.
When humans first find the Flood, it inhabits a dog-like species of alien. Soon, the monstrous parasites begin spreading and wreaking havoc. Out of desperation, the humans flee, eventually making it into Forerunner territory. The Forerunners don't take too kindly to this intrusion, and war soon breaks out.
At some point during the war, the Flood retreats, not to be seen for thousands of years, but still to the Forerunners, the threat that is humanity remained.
Humanity's final stand takes place on a planet called Char-Makor. Forerunner forces killed most of humanity, and many other humans took their own lives. Grenade to the feet.
And this crushing defeat pushes human technology and society back millions of years to the point they're essentially cavemen. And the Forerunner, seeing that their enemy has been defeated, does have at least the decency to return the humans to their homeworld, Earth. For the rest of the Forerunners' galactic dominance, humans won't be a problem. What the Forerunners likely don't know is that humanity will outlive them. Worse still, the Forerunner has just been lying in wait for their enemy to be at its weakest. 97,445 BC, end of the Forerunner Flood Wars.
Just as with humanity, the Flood mercilessly pursues the Forerunners into their territory. It starts to infest everything and spread through Forerunner worlds. The situation goes from bad to worse when mendicant bias, a super advanced artificial intelligence, becomes rampant and sides with the Flood. Rampancy is an inevitable malfunction that afflicts AI in the Halo universe, essentially causing them to do whatever they want. Mendicant bias stirs up a storm, making the Flood's job easier.
As the Flood infestation progresses, the prospect of using the Halo rings starts to look better and better. You see, the reason is these rings are not just cool structures with land on them, they're also weapons. The Halo rings are the ultimate weapon for destroying the Flood, but see, victory would come at a cost: the annihilation of most, if not all, sentient life in the galaxy. See, the Flood feeds on sentience as a food source, and while activating the Halo ring does do damage to the Flood, it really is more just to kill their food supply. Killing all sentient life would mean the end of the Flood. On the pacifist side of things though, the Librarian, God bless her soul, a leader among the Forerunner society, uses the Halo rings as a mean to preserve and study life. I mean, they just wanted to hit the big old reset button that would have just taken us all out, but the Librarian's like, hey, let's try to keep some progress, Backup supply. Happily, life on the inner portion of the Halo rings would not be destroyed if it was used. The Halo rings were built in 2 installations called arcs. The Flood destroyed the greater arc, along with 11 of the original Halos, but luckily there is also a smaller arc called Installation 00. Installation 00 created a new bunch of Halos and was able to deploy the new rings. These rings would be able to kill just about everything, leading the parasitic Flood to starve without a food source. And out of desperation, these new rings were deployed and fired, destroying all life except what was on the rings. Eventually, the few remaining Forerunners brought the surviving species back to their native planets so that life could continue. I guess we can thank the Forerunners for saving humanity. The Flood, without anything left to feed on, dies out, except for those that were left on the Halo rings themselves, as the Forerunner kept a few little samples around for research. No way that could possibly go wrong, right? Skipping forward about 100,000 years to 2494 AD, the Insurrection. Humanity is once again a thriving species, and they have the ability to travel to the stars just like their ancestors, but even in a slower, clunkier way. They've colonized numerous planets too. However, there is still plenty of unrest. In the outer human colonies of space, a group called the Insurrectionists seek to separate themselves from the United Earth government. To stop the uprising, the government sends in the United Nations Space Command, or UNSC, and civil war ensues. The insurrection spans decades. At least one good thing comes from the insurrection, though: the creation of the Spartan II program. 2511 AD, the Spartan II program. Now, if you've played Halo, then you definitely know what a Spartan is. And no, we're not talking about the heroes of the movie 300, though you wouldn't be far off, and they were named for the same heroes. The comparison is very apt. Spartans, particularly the Spartan IIs, are genetically enhanced super soldiers bred for warfare from a very young age. You might be thinking to yourself, if there are Spartan IIs, then there must be Spartan Is as well, right? Well, you'd be correct. The Spartan I program, also known as the Orion Project, was the original plan. They wanted to genetically modify soldiers to make them better at what they did already. Sergeant Johnson from the main Halo games was a Spartan I, which might explain why he's such a badass still. Still, they don't hold a candle to the next generation of super soldiers. They had to be crafted into this life. The insurrection is becoming a serious problem for the UNSC, so it's time to bring out the big guns, or rather, make the big guns, and commence with the Spartan II program. Led by Dr. Catherine Halsey, the Spartan program fields candidates within a certain age range with specific genetic traits. Specifically, the age ranges of like 10 single digits, and 75 candidates from various planets in the UNSC space are chosen and kidnapped from their homes. It gets better, they live a nice life. They're swapped with genetically identical Flash clones designed to die young, so their parents would believe that they died. Okay, I didn't say this was a great choice or ethically good, not even morally gray. This is pretty dark, but desperate times called for desperate measures, and in the end, they end up saving humanity, so worth it? Among the Spartan candidates chosen is John 117, who would later be known as the Master Chief, our main protagonist and hero of the Halo games. On the planet Reach, the candidates go through rigorous physical and mental training over the course of years. Eventually, they're genetically modified. The candidates are infused with growth hormones, bone enhancements, and other incredibly invasive procedures, and they would either become the perfect super soldier, capable of flipping tanks with their bare hands, or develop an array of terrible medical conditions, or even die. Only 33 Spartans survived the mutations, less than half, and even fewer of them are left in fighting shape. Those who do make the cut, however, become the ultimate killing machines, and they're outfitted with the incredibly powerful Mjolnir power armor and the latest weaponry. Although Spartans are meant to combat the insurrectionists, a more important task pops up: the Human Covenant War. 2525 AD, First Contact. The planet Harvest is the site of first contact between the Covenant and humanity. The Covenant is a conglomerate of alien species that worships the Forerunners. The Covenant only knows of the Forerunners from the technology that the long-dead species left behind and that they've reverse-engineered into their own armada. Apparently, this tech, like the Halo rings, is so remarkable that they created a religion around it. The Covenant inducts every species they conquer into their ranks, so it's actually a pretty diverse group. They are led by the scrawny-looking Sanshayum, the descendants of a race of aliens that betrayed the humans in the War Forerunners. The Sanshayum leading the Covenant are called the Prophets. For the sake of not having to pronounce some weird alien names over and over, we're going to refer to the other aliens by their nicknames the humans gave them, also the ones more common to be shown in the video games: the Elites, Grunts, and Brutes. Unfortunately, the drones and hunters and others don't really leave as much of a mark on history. In 2525, human ships near the planet Harvest are being attacked by an unknown source. The UNSC tasks Staff Sergeant Avery Johnson and Sergeant Major Nolan Byrne with setting up a trap, and they are able to intercept the ship and destroy it, which turns out to be a Covenant ship, marking the first time humanity encountered the Covenant.
Another Covenant ship comes within Harvest proximity, angry that they lost one of their own, but they're also searching for Forerunner relics, which they detected on Harvest. Humanity tries to go, "Hey, my bad," and proposes a meeting. The Covenant decides to meet up with us, but under the pretenses of false diplomacy. Seeing an opportunity to snoop around for Forerunner relics, they meet with us on our planet, and spoiler alert, things don't go too well. To be fair, if they did, we wouldn't really have video games about this, because nobody wants to just have, and then they live happily ever after the video game, the end.
Both sides start shooting each other, and to make matters worse, the Prophets discovered that the relics they detected were not objects, they were humans. And Prophets, I do not like being itemized as a thing.
The Forerunners considered humans to be their successors. It was up to us, humanity, to be the next protector of all life. The Prophets incorrectly hypothesized that humanity might be partially descended from the Forerunners. And if this was true, the Prophets' religion would very quickly fall apart, creating chaos and putting the Sanchayum's authority in jeopardy.
So the Prophets find a solution like anyone does in power, label the humans as heretics, and completely wipe them out. Not cool. Not cool, guys.
It is a hard battle, and humanity is not prepared for the advanced tech of the Covenant. Long story short, a lot of people die on Harvest in the conflict. Humanity knows the battle is lost and evacuate the planet just before the Covenant brings their ships in and glasses the planet. Glassing is a typical endgame tactic used by the Covenant, where they use plasma bombs from their ships that are so destructive and hot that they melt the surface of the planet, making it uninhabitable and its terrain glass-like. Harvest is the first planet to fall in a long and terrible war. August 2552 AD, Reach. Throughout the years, the Covenant continues to invade human worlds, hellbent on two things: recovering Forerunner relics and kicking our front teeth in. As the home of the Spartan training program, Reach is a very important military planet for the UNSC, kind of like the Pentagon, but a planet. Losing Reach would be devastating for the human war effort. The good news is the UNSC has Spartan 2s and the newer but less powerful Spartan 3s, though they're kind of a secret, so don't talk about them too much. Once the Covenant arrives at Reach, they are unrelenting, but thanks to the Spartans and the full force of humanity's military, the UNSC puts up a strong resistance against the Covenant. Ultimately, after about a month of fighting, both sides sustain terrible losses. The UNSC is forced to retreat. Dr. Halsey is evacuated, but many Spartan 2s and Spartan 3s are killed, or as the UNSC would put it, missing in action. One of the Spartans, John 117, aka the Master Chief, escapes via a ship named the Pillar of Autumn. The smart AI Cortana was also on board the ship, which proves to be an invaluable asset in the future, but more on that later. Overall, billions of humans died from the loss of Reach, and nothing stands in the way of the Covenant reaching Earth. Meanwhile, Master Chief and the Pillar of Autumn are unknowingly headed towards a long-dormant Halo ring. And we know that the Covenant love Forerunner artifacts, so you bet they're going to be there too. Now, do you remember the 21st of September, 2552 AD, Combat Evolved? I don't actually know if it was on the 21st, but September. Not long after Reach, the UNSC calls upon Master Chief to fight. Chief is taken out of cryo sleep and quickly finds himself in some serious shit. The Pillar of Autumn is under attack by Covenant raiders, and Chief hustles to the front of the ship, where he meets Captain Keyes, who tasks him with protecting Cortana. Cortana's programming is based on a clone of Dr. Halsey's brain, and she's an incredible repository of information. So if she fell into Covenant's hands, humanity would be in even greater danger than they already are. Chief fights his way to the escape pods as best he can. Those pods are set to land on the only thing in proximity, the relic we later know as the Halo Ring, Installation 04. Master Chief crash lands on the Halo, making him part of the first group of humans to encounter a Halo and set foot on it for thousands of years since our ancient ancestors were saved by the Forerunners. With the help of Cortana, Chief learns that the Halo Rings are Forerunner structures. That certainly explains why the Covenant are so interested in them and so pissed that we're touching them. However, he's yet to discover that they can be used as super weapons. Do you remember when I said that the Flood didn't completely die out? Installation 04 also happens to be where Forerunners conducted research on the parasite, which is bad news for the UNSC. Bad news for everybody except the Flood, really. Inevitably, the Flood gets released, and the threat of the Flood quickly outpaces the threat of the Covenant. Captain Keyes gets taken over by the Flood, and the Chief must put him out of his misery to prevent the Flood from using his knowledge to escape the ring and head to Earth. Plenty of other UNSC and Covenant soldiers get taken over too, sadly. and the flood rapidly grows in number. A Forerunner AI 343 Guilty Spark tells Chief that the only way to stop the flood is to activate the ring. Cortana tells Chief to hold up, because that'll just kill everything. Instead of doing that, Chief and Cortana plan that if they just destroy the ring, it'll destroy everything there instead of everything everywhere. Chief heads to the now crashed Pillar of Autumn, which is infested with flood, but still somewhat operational. He destroys the ship and creates what is essentially a giant nuke by destroying the fusion reactors within. Only a few folks, including Chief and our friend Sergeant Johnson, manage to escape the destruction of Installation 04. October and November 2552 AD, Halo 2. Not long after Chief's victory on Installation 04, he and Sergeant Johnson are on a space station above Earth receiving medals for their heroic actions. As they're making their way to an award ceremony, the Covenant attacks the station. And yes, the Covenant has finally found Earth, humanity's last hope. Chief does what Spartan 2s do and kicks the Covenant's ass. The Covenant places a bomb on the station to try to say "fuck you" back, but in what may be his most badass moment, Chief jumps into space with the bomb and sticks it right back into a Covenant ship. He jumps away in time to fly off, see it detonate, and lands on his friend's ship, and they go back down to Earth. But humanity isn't out of the woods just yet, far from it in fact. The Covenant begins its invasion of Earth, dropping troops and preparing to glass everything. After a tough fight on Earth's surface, Chief, Sergeant Johnson, and Miranda Keyes, Captain Keyes' daughter, escape aboard a ship right before bombardment begins. A Covenant carrier opens a slip space portal to get out of Dodge, and Keyes maneuvers the ship through it just before it closes. This transports them to another Halo ring, called Installation 05. The Prophet of Regret, who was leading the assault on Earth in a Covenant oligarch, is on the surface of Halo. Chief ends up killing the worm-like lunatic, putting an end to one of the Covenant's 3 main leaders. Shortly afterward, the Covenant tries to bomb the hell out of Chief, but he escapes by jumping into the water. Being knocked out, a tentacle grabs him and drags him even deeper into the water. This tentacle ends up belonging to a Gravemind, an intelligent giant flood collective that kind of acts as a brain to the parasites. But luckily for him, Gravemind doesn't instantly kill him, as he has a plan for the Chief. Around this same time, Chief comes face to face with an elite known as the Arbiter. After a conversation, the Arbiter finds out that the Covenant's religious beliefs are all a bunch of lies and decides to turn against them and fight back. Gravemind tasks them both with stopping the Covenant from activating Installation 05 by checking 2 likely places. It sounds like Gravemind is looking out for the best of humanity, but it's actually just setting the stage for the Flood to win in the end. As obvious as this is to our heroes, they don't really have much of a choice, as firing the Halo rings would pretty much kill everyone in the galaxy, which is kind of where they live. Meanwhile, the death of the Prophet of Regret has caused great turmoil within the Covenant. Now, the Brutes, one of the Covenant's species, takes the opportunity to rise up in the ranks. The Elites and Brutes are at odds with each other, and there is a lot of infighting. The Gravemind sees this turmoil within their ranks and crashes a flood-infested human ship at the Covenant's mother base, High Charity. Cortana happens to be on board the Covenant base with the Master Chief, and since she's an AI, she should be fine and unable to be infected, right? Aboard High Charity, one of the oligarchs, the Prophet of Mercy, falls victim to the Flood. He becomes infected, and his buddy, the Prophet of Truth, sits there and kinda just lets it happen. I mean, like, I wouldn't want to touch that thing either, it looks gross, but, like, he's also a scheming, power-hungry bastard, so, like, he's a jerk. Chief, who's also on board High Charity, makes sure that Mercy dies, probably to make sure he doesn't get absorbed into the Flood conscious, because that would also be very bad. As the Flood overruns High Charity, Cortana insists on staying on the ship to ensure Chief's escape. Chief promises Cortana he'll return for her and escapes in a Forerunner dreadnought that the Covenant had been hiding, shooting back to Earth at super light speed. Since parting ways with the Chief, the Arbiter manages to group up with Sergeant Johnson, Miranda Keyes, 343 Guilty Spark on Installation 05. This leads to a pretty nice little truce between 2 species that have been trying to kill each other for decades. Their goal is to make sure that Installation 05 doesn't get activated, but the brute chieftain Tartarus and his group of lackeys stand in their way. The Arbiter and the gang kill Tartarus, preventing the ring from firing in the end, and thus ends Halo 2 and starts the greatest cliffhanger / worst cliffhanger of my childhood. November and December of 2552 AD, Halo 3. Master Chief lands back on Earth in the dense Kenyan jungle, which is crawling with brutes, grunts, and jackal snipers.
Quick aside, by the way, the jackals that could kill you on legendary difficulty in 1 hit is still a ridiculous mechanic in Bungie. I did not like it. It did not make it fun. It just made the game difficult. I see your bull. Moving on.
Johnson and the Arbiter and other UNSC troops find Chief and he gets back right into the action. He doesn't have Cortana, but he doesn't need her to kick some Covenant ass. These months mark the final days of fighting against the Covenant and the Flood. The Brutes are now total replacements for the Elites as the vanguards of the Covenant forces. Meanwhile, the Elites have mostly joined forces with the humans to take down the Covenant. Earth's defenders fight the Covenant as hard as they can, but the Flood-infested High Charity sends a Covenant ship to crash land on the city of Voy, and the Flood run free, taking over humans and Covenant alike on Earth. With the Flood finally having reached our planet, this could truly mean the end of humanity. Luckily, the Covenant forces that are helping us, that is to say the Elite ships, use this glassing technology they had used against us so many times to cleanse our planet of Flood. Oh, a part of it, like a burn mark. Using a Forerunner artifact, Chief, the Arbiter, and his new crew travel to the Forerunner hub capable of firing the remaining Halo rings remotely. Installation 00, aka the Ark. This too is infested with Covenant and Flood, which we have to fight through, and everyone wants it for a different reason. The Covenant want to activate it because they believe it's part of the Great Journey, part of the religious doctrine that allows them to ascend to godhood. The Flood want to destroy it because it's going to kill their food supply, that is, our heads. And of course, we want to use it in a way that, won't kill us, because that'd be nice, not to die. But Prophet of Truth wants to use us to activate it, so we gotta stop him. But luckily, our buddy the Arbiter introduces him to his energy sword. So, after the Arbiter kills the Prophet of Truth and finally avenges his fallen brethren, he also kills the last leader of the Covenant, and the Covenant crisis is over, for the foreseeable future at least. Chief still has a promise to keep, though, to his best buddy Cortana. Chief discovers from Cortana that the Ark is creating another Halo, and the Halos are designed to kill everything. But this new Halo wouldn't do that in such close proximity, and because it's incomplete, it's just going to kill everything in a reasonable distance, and the Flood happens to be within a reasonable distance. Most of the Flood and the Gravemind are in its range, as High Charity is within orbit, so firing it seems like a pretty good idea now. In order to fire it, however, Chief will need an index, or key, which Cortana just so happens to still have. Chief has to then fight his way through the flood-filled ruins of High Charity to locate and return Cortana and rescue her before she succumbs to the Gravemind's influence. Chief, Cortana, the Arbiter, and Sergeant Johnson then make their way onto the control room of the new Halo ring, where they can activate this new Halo. 343 Guilty Spark realizes that in doing so, though, will destroy this new incomplete ring, which he has claimed is his. Talk about a Gollum moment of turning on us. He wants that Halo just like an angry toddler wants their juice box, except for if this angry toddler has the laser face. Tragically, 343 Guilty Sparks kills Sergeant Johnson with a laser blast to the face, and Master Chief then has to avenge Johnson by destroying this stupid little drone. Chief activates the ring, escapes with the Arbiter onto a docked UNSC ship, and gets the hell out of Dodge. As the Arbiter's flying the ship through the portal they used to get here, the portal closes, cutting the ship in half. The Arbiter makes his way back to Earth, but the Chief is not so lucky. He's on the half that didn't make it through and is stuck in space. With nothing to do but wait until help comes along, the Chief enters cryosleep indefinitely, with Cortana watching over him. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the Covenant forces have been defeated, the Flood has been eradicated, and the UNSC believes that the war is over, but at the loss of a great hero.
That being said, if you played Halo 4 and beyond, you know damn well that the Chief lives. So, leading up to Halo Infinite, if you want to see a timeline covering the events of the post-Human Covey War, let us know. I'm Alpha Lance with the Leaderboard. Thanks for watching.